You know that out of the 10 Commandments, only 9 of them are brought over to the New Testament.
Now, I've heard so many times what this gentleman just said, but I'm going to show you why it's not true. Here in Hebrews 4, the Bible mentions the 4th commandment. And no, nowhere in this chapter does it say that Jesus is the Sabbath. It says the 7th day is the Sabbath. Now, what fascinates me about this chapter and verse, Revelation 14, verses 6 and 7, is how verse 7 quotes directly from the 4th commandment, worship him that made heaven, earth, and all that, and verse 6 calls it part of the everlasting gospel. Why? Ezekiel 20, verse 12 says that the Sabbath is the sign that God sanctifies us. That's why. Now, this verse was quoted in the original video that I'm stitching, but it's ironic when people quote that verse to say that the Sabbath was changed or abolished, when this verse says the Sabbath was made for man. All man. And there's no indication that it would stop at any time. Now, here in Matthew 24, Jesus said, "Pray that your flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath." And he was prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world. And the destruction of Jerusalem happened nearly 40 years after his death and resurrection. Why would he give us such a warning about an event that would happen after his death and resurrection if the Sabbath no longer mattered? Now, Revelation 4, verse 11 talks about God, how he is worthy of worship because he is a creator. Why does God say to keep the Sabbath? Because he is a creator. So anytime we see in Scripture that God is a creator and we should worship him because of that, it's an allusion to the Sabbath. Here we see the same thing in Revelation chapter 5, when verse 13 quotes directly from the 4th commandment as well. And this is in the context of the 7 seals. Now here Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." And he doesn't specify which ones are okay to keep and which ones are okay to break. And notice here, Jesus says, "Showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments." Now here Jesus is asked, which is the greatest commandment in the law? They were trying to trip him up. And Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God." That's the first. "Love your neighbor." That's the second. But where was he quoting from? Leviticus 19 summarizes the 10 Commandments and says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Deuteronomy 6 is a summary of Deuteronomy 5, which is the 10 Commandments, and says love the Lord your God with all your heart. People use Colossians 2 all the time because it says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us. What was that handwriting of ordinances? We need to let the Bible explain itself. Deuteronomy 31 says it was the law of Moses, the book of the law which was put in the side of the ark. That's what was against us. Hebrews 9 says the 10 Commandments was placed inside the ark. The law of Moses, the ceremonial law, was temporary. The 10 Commandments, including the Sabbath, is eternal. Now in the book of Acts, it records the early church keeping Sabbath over 80 times, never once as Sunday. 3 times in Acts 17, twice in Acts 13, again in Acts 16, 78 times in Acts 18. This idea that the Sabbath was changed and no longer matters is a false gospel. It's not true, and it will result in the loss of salvation for billions of Christians. Blessed are they that do his commandments.